Hey YouTube, it's Eric. This is going to be a somewhat quick video here. I just wanted to show you that I'm going to read out this rare newsletter that I received in the mail. This is another one of the Holdridge news notes letters from former U.S. Brigadier General Herbert C. Holdridge. This one here is news notes number 19. There's just some very good information in here, and it probably won't take me too long to read it, and I figured it'd be a good subject for my next video. And just for clarification, I linked the link in the description, but I've already uploaded this Herbert Holdridge news notes to my archive.org page. This is news notes number 15. This one's called Conspiracy Against the Constitution. This one is online here. And I've also I got these letters here I got from a website, Valerium Books. I think it's based in San Francisco. But I got this letter also that Brigadier General Herbert Holdridge wrote to Newbold Noyes, who is the editor of the Washington Star newspaper, calling out Noyes and the entire state of journalism. And Holdridge, take it out of the laminate here. There's also a letter here that I've uploaded both of these to archive.org. This letter is called Indictment for Treason. And Holdridge wrote this to Senator Richard B. Russell, Chairman of the Senate Armed Service Committee, and Congressman Carl Vinson, Chairman of the House Armed Service Committee. So Holdridge was a very, very interesting figure. He's one of the only, Brigadier General Thomas Harris was a general in the U.S. Army, and he wrote a book called Rome's Responsibility for the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln. That was back in the 1860s. But in terms of like 20th century U.S. Generals and former generals, Holdridge is the only general I've seen that criticized the Vatican. You can even see this here. I have an article up from the Washington Daily News here. Here's a photo of Holdridge. Looks like 1965. The general grows impatient. He sits in his apartment at the Cardinal House in Arlington, 2 miles from the White House, and pursues his vision, quote, of an early collapse of our society, of competitions, exploitations, and violences. And Holdridge writes about the birth of a new golden age. The vision is shadowed by a conspiracy, quote, the crazed LBJ and his Vatican mafia of the White House, Pentagon, State Department, and CIA, backed by a crazed press, with the shadowy figure of Pope Paul fitting above in the background. Quote. So this general was viewed as a threat. You see here, there's an article from the Washington Post. Here is this from? I think this was from. I think six again. It looks like 65 again. This Washington Post article that I found here shows that the FBI actually wanted to put Herbert C. Holdridge in a mental hospital. The FBI and the Secret Service. And then Holdridge is quoted in this Washington Post article saying, I've tried to tell the truth about the groups that are undermining our Constitution. There is a political arm of the Vatican. It's known that there is such a political group, and I think they control the press. Well, they factually do control the press. And actually, here's another interesting letter I got from Holdridge in the mail not too long ago. I've also uploaded this 4-page letter onto archive.org. This one's titled, it's a letter to the President of the United States, the Congress of the United States, and the Supreme Court of the United States. Subtitle is Classification of the Hierarchy of the Vatican and its Agents in the United States as Subversives. I recommend you check that out. All of these are available. I believe I put the link in the description. Yeah, here I typed in Holdridge on the search bar and typed in this link. I also found one of Holdridge's 2 books that he wrote. His other book was called The Fables of Moronia, which is an interesting sounding title. That's why I think that's a fictional book. But this is Holdridge's nonfiction book that he wrote here called How to Gain Freedom from Economic Slavery. This is a great critique of monopolistic capitalism, and there's also some he criticizes the Vatican in this book as well. But here's a photo of Holdridge in 43. But I'm going to be reading the Holdridge news notes, the most recent news notes I got in the mail. This one's number 19 from August 10th, 1957. And I'm going to be scanning this onto archive.org very soon, probably in a couple days it'll be up. Just going to see if anyone's in the chat before I start here. Holdridge was spot on with stuff, calling for like the Vatican. Holdridge was saying it's the Vatican that's the force trying to create a world government. And actually, I have this New York Times article. I saw this from Veritas Aquitas at Rome Rules. I saw that he linked this, but I got the full photo from the New York Times from 1959 here. But you see, like this was going on. Like it's open that the Jesuits and the Vatican are the force, calling for the one world totalitarian government. Here you see it's being called by the Jesuit Reverend Louis Paulison. Okay, going back here to Holdridge. So this is only 4 pages. It probably won't take me too long. Hey, how's it going, guys? Hey, Barb. Hey, Jeremy. Nice to see you. Yeah, Jeremy. I appreciate all the emails you sent, Jeremy. And if anyone wants to send me emails, just my address is in my description page on my YouTube channel, ericbowman96@gmail.com. Just send a subject title if you're gonna send me an email. I'll check it out. Okay, but starting here, so this newsletter is called "The Age of Barbarism." Okay, so this is written from former U.S. Brigadier General Herbert C. Holdridge. So it says here, number 1, historical perspective. These summaries become repetitious and perhaps boresome, but we must maintain our historical perspective. Well, to me, this type of truth never gets boring. But continuing here, historians generally consider that the Dark Ages, the age of barbarism, of medievalism, commenced with the fall of the Roman Empire in 476 AD and ended with the French Revolution when the feudal age blew itself up. The conclusion is premature. If we assure that one of the characteristics of an enlightened civilization, the quote golden age of Greece, for example, is the intellectual emancipation of the individual and his right to act freely in accordance with his enlightened views, then we are in fact moving still deeper into a darker age. With total annihilation through the H-bomb at the end of the road because our people dare neither to think nor act. I think that's well said. So I'm just going to repeat that last sentence. We are moving still deeper into a darker age with total annihilation through the H-bomb at the end of the road because our people dare neither think nor act. This is Herbert C. Holdridge talking here. In the process, our Declaration of Independence and the preamble and Bill of Rights of our Constitution, which promised emancipation of our people, became historically a minor, brief, futile episode and a defeat in the evolutionary process of the race. Then he goes, Section 2, the haves versus the have-nots. Much of the hatred and violence in the world, international, national, and individual, has arisen out of conflicts between the, quote, haves and the, quote, have-nots, under economic conditions of scarcities of never enough. These economic concepts have been obsolete under the impact of the great revolution of abundances created by technology and automation. If we grasp the opportunity, this abundance can be transformed into abundances for all the peoples of the world so that no one need ever go hungry again. You just think about like almost half of the food that's produced in the United States is thrown out. That's monopolistic capitalism. Continuing here, though, the barbarisms of man's inhumanity to man might be reasonable in the world of scarcities under the urge to survive. In a world of abundances, they become an obscenity. For the religious, a blasphemy against Almighty God. History records no act of stupid barbarism to equal our practice of dumping abundances into the ocean while people starve. Ours has become the barbaric age of the, quote, fast buck. And then you go to Section 3, here we have barbaric overlords. The modern equivalent of the barbaric overlords of the Dark Ages are present in force. To replace Louis XIV, the very Catholic sovereign of France who had his Jesuit confessor, Father Pierre Lachasse, I added that last part there, but continuing with Holdridge. To replace Louis XIV and the Bourbons, we have the 40 thieves of Wall Street promoting their systems of worldwide economic feudalism, their base of operations in the United States, and their branch offices in London, Paris, Brussels, Rome, Madrid, and Bonn. These are the modern, quote, men without a country, for they yield patriotic loyalties to no political state. At the time of the French Revolution, backing the Bourbons were the barbarians of the papacy, whose inquisities were so shocking that even the lowly Roman Catholic priests rejected them to support the exploited peasantry. These same unrepentant forces of Vaticanism, of Jesuitism, now back the barbaric 40 thieves and their cohorts in even greater violences against the people, against human liberties, and against civilization itself. Once more, the lowly priests and Roman Catholic citizens are torn between the causes of righteousness and the loyalty to their barbaric leaders of the Vatican who hate the people. Continuing here, these partners in crime, the 40 thieves and the papacy, who make common cause against the people and who are now faced with the imminent collapse of their feudalistic world, can now say with Louis XIV of France, quote, "After me, the deluge," end quote. And here is section 4 here, barbaric government. Holdridge continues, and this is at the end of page 1 here of the newsletter. Our government, as discussed in earlier news notes, has become one of the perjured outlaws, each sworn to defend the Constitution, but each advocating his authority to the dictatorship of the 40 thieves and the Jesuits, end quote. Really continuing here. I'm going to repeat that last second, or repeat that. That's well said. Our government, as discussed in earlier news notes, has become one of the perjured outlaws, each sworn to defend the Constitution, but each advocating his authority to the dictatorship of the 40 thieves and the Jesuits. The process of destroying the fruits of the American Revolution commenced from the early colonial period. More recently, Woodrow Wilson and the Congress in 1913 advocated the power of the government over the financial system of the country into the hands of the 40 thieves operating through the illegally created Federal Reserve banks, which constitute a gigantic counterfeiting ring which prints counterfeit money upon which the people are required to pay usurious rates of interest, and which has carried the country into bankruptcy. And the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, when the Federal Reserve Act was signed, Edward Douglas White, was trained at 2 Jesuit schools and was a devout Catholic. And now lay Jesuit Edward Douglas White has a statue at the hall in Congress, the hall of all the statues. It's like where they have the 2 statues from each state. Edward Douglas White is from Louisiana. Holdridge continues, in California, the Bank of America, he writes formally, the Bank of Italy, reportedly acts as a financial dummy for the Vatican. And that's absolutely true. The Bank of America was founded by a Knight of Malta, A.P. Giannini. I think that's this is on my Jesuit World Order book page here. 7 billions. Give me a second here. But you can read. I'm going to link this in my description because Holdridge brings up Bank of America. I have the article from Der Spiegel. Here it is. Here. This is just this was one of the first posts I did on the page. It's way down in my Jesuit World Order blog. I quoted this text in the Dollar and the Vatican preface I wrote, but this is what the German magazine Der Spiegel said. They say, I'll continue back to Holdridge, but Der Spiegel says the influence of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuit order, in the American financial world first became apparent 50 years ago when the Italian financier A.P. Giannini founded the Bank of California, which today is one of the largest banks in the world under the new name, the Bank of America. Giannini was an extremely skillful financier who owed his starting capital to the Jesuits and figured as their trust or straw man. Today, Bank of America is 51% owned by the order. Okay, and this Spiegel article came out in 1958, just a year after this news notes here from Holdridge, so right in around the same time. As Holdridge says here, and I'm going to repeat what he said about the Bank of America. In California, the Bank of America, formerly the Bank of Italy, reportedly acts as a financial dummy for the Vatican. And then Holdridge continues, Herbert Hoover Sr. is a high, and then I'm just going to add here, I learned this from Peter J. Doiswick, but Herbert Hoover actually married his wife in front of a Catholic priest while he was as a supposed Protestant. And I put in the preface for the Dollar in the Vatican that Herbert Hoover accepted a medal from the Catholic Boys Brigade in 1928. And then, 1928 or 1930, one of those 2 years. And then Herbert Hoover also wrote was essentially writing love letters to the Supreme Knight of the Knights of Columbus, Martin Comedy, in 1932. So Hoover, it was a great illusion to have at the time, because the devout open Catholic Alfred E. Smith, the papal chamberlain, lost the election to Herbert Hoover, the quote Protestant Herbert Hoover. So there's this huge illusion that, the Catholic Church has no power in Protestant America, because Hoover won the election. But Herbert Hoover did marry his wife in front of a Catholic priest, and you can see a photo of Herbert Hoover meeting Pope Pius XII in 1947 at the Vatican. I recommend you check that out. But Holdridge says here, Hubert Hoover Sr., high priest of this pagan economic cult of usury, larceny of the 40 thieves, betrayed the people with empty promises of chickens in every pot and cars in every garage, even as the tornado. Going to the next page here. Even as the tornado of violent depression began to sweep away the securities and even the very lives of countless millions. And actually, in Aber Manhattan and the Dollar in the Vatican has lots of information on Herbert Hoover's crimes during the Great Depression. And it was cool to see that Herbert Holdridge, in the news notes I've already put online, number 15 here, that he actually references Avero's book, The Dollar in the Vatican, on the third or fourth page. Davies here. His son, Herbert Jr., acolyte of his illustrious father, according to Drew Pearson, advanced the fortunes of Standard Oil in Saudi Arabia within the very portals of the State Department. Would you look at that? Or he says in Arabia. I thought the page was cut off here. Yeah, so according to Drew Pearson, Herbert Hoover Jr. advanced the fortunes of Standard Oil in Arabia within the very portals of the State Department. And then Holdridge names Franklin D. Roosevelt. Franklin D. Roosevelt, acting as receiver in bankruptcy for the 40 thieves after 1933, restored them to power at the cost of some $60 billion sweated out of our taxpayers. And when that proved ineffective, conspired to involve the United States in World War II to enrich them beyond the dreams of a Midas at the cost of the blood of millions. King Midas was the king who famously, when he touched anything he touched, would turn to gold. Then Harry S. Truman, apprentice puppet of a criminal political machine in Missouri, and established in professional status as puppet of the larger crime ring of the 40 thieves and Jesuits, committed in the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki the most vicious single act of barbarism, of mass murder in the history of the world. Launched the murderous Korean War for the same gangsters, and today, like, quote, little Jack Horner of the nursery rhyme, stirts before the world, boasting of his exploits, and exclaims, quote, what a brave boy I am, end quote. As with Wilson, Hoover, and Roosevelt, Harry S. Truman collaborated in subverted Congress and countersigned the blank check. And then he names Dwight D. Eisenhower. Dwight D. Eisenhower follows in their footsteps. He introduces the H-bomb as his single plank in government, races neck and neck from brink to brink of disaster with Luciferian John Foster Dulles, delivers the last resources of the people to the plundering 40 thieves as fast as his pen can scratch his name, and like Truman, sticks his thumbs into the same mess of violence as he grins disarmingly and proclaims, quote, what a spiritual boy am I, end quote. That's what Eisenhower proclaimed. Then Holdridge names John Foster Dulles, trigger man for, quote, Murder Incorporated, that being John Foster Dulles, ambidextrously balances his loyalties to the 40 thieves with his loyalties to the Jesuits. And, John Foster Dulles' son, Avery Dulles, became a Jesuit. Now to say with Nagasaki, I think with the Jesuits, with the Jesuit novitiates surviving the nuclear blast at Nagasaki, I think that definitively shows it wasn't a nuclear bomb, but it's still, it was still a mass murder. The Jesuits, I think, used the magnesium flash device instead, and it was still the Papal Knight Thomas S. Power who led the napalm campaigns all over Japan, still caused, incalculable destruction, as Holdridge just mentioned. So you see here, John Foster Dulles, triggerman for, quote, Murder Incorporated, ambidextrously balances his loyalties to the 40 thieves with his loyalties to the Jesuits as he rushes all over the world seeking alibis for his unwillingness to disarm. Let us not forget Sherman Adams, quote, assistant to the president and the sellout to the barbarians, the quote, Fagin of the administration who teaches the boyish, immature, so they would have us believe, Eisenhower of all the tricks of the trade and out that. Okay, let me repeat that here. Sherman Adams is the assistant to the president and the sellout to the barbarians, the Fagin of the administration who teaches the boyish, immature, so they would have us believe, Eisenhower of all of the tricks of the trade of outlawry. And then Holdridge continues, in the light of these established facts documented day by Drew Pearson, not a man in top executive office from Eisenhower on down, not a member of Congress, not a member of the Supreme Court, not an admiral or a general in the Pentagon, but has perjured his oath to defend the Constitution. Ours is an outlaw government of, by, and for outlaws, not for the people. This major difference between the outlawry of a Genghis Khan and the outlaws who pillage our country is that Genghis Khan and his hordes galloped on horses and risked their lives openly in their depredations, whereas the latter ride in solid gold Cadillacs and work in secret like moles burrowing underground, just as moles burrowing underground have killed the beautiful roses in my garden by destroying their roots. That's well said there. And then Holdridge continues here with the civil liberties. The current debate in Congress over civil liberties is a case in point of the domestic front. Wait, so there's a few. This word here. When I do upload this, I have to go over a few of the words in pen. Some of the letters are faded out. The current debate in Congress over the Civil Liberties Bill is a case in point on the domestic front, illustrates the descent into barbarism. The primary purpose of the bill is to amend the Constitution by act of Congress, to deny millions of our citizens their constitutional rights clearly defined under the Bill of Rights at the instigation of frightened, barbaric Bourbons of the Deep South, quote, Baptists for the most part, calling themselves, quote, Christians, who are determined to establish the point that their, quote, God did not intend Negroes to be full citizens of the United States. Holdridge continues, a government and a people dedicated to the principles written to our charters of liberty would not demand an illegal act of Congress to define and limit the area which the Constitution is applicable, to keep millions at the level of peasantry, a putrid package of treason, that Holdridge writes. Going here to Section 6, we got the assassination of President Armas of Guatemala. Holdridge writes, the assassination of President Armas of Guatemala illustrates a putrid package of treason on the international front. The prior government of the country was established legally by the democratic vote of the people. Its attempts to serve its own people were displeasing to the United Fruit Company and thus to the 40 Thieves, and particularly displeasing to the Jesuits. So a conspiracy was hatched in our State Department under the guidance of the Luciferian Dulles and manipulated by our ambassador Purifoy and the papal legate. The government of this friendly state was overthrown, Guatemala, by force and violence from without, and Armas was set up as a puppet of the 40 Thieves in the Vatican amid the cheers of our barbaric, immoral press. Now Armas and Purifoy are dead, the first at the hands of an assassin, the other as a result of a motor accident planned, in Indochina. That's interesting there. They lived by the sword and perished by the sword. But what of the prime movers? And then Holdridge lists the prime movers: the papal legate, the Pope, the commanding general, the Jesuits, the Dulles and Eisenhower, and the president of United Fruit, and all of the 40 Thieves, and the generals and the Pentagon, all of whom had a hand in the violences. Their time too will come under the invariable law of compensations of karma. And then that's the end of page 2 here. Then we go to page 3. And then Holdridge, this next bullet point here is titled "The Great West Point U.S. Mail Robbery." Actually, I'm going to go back to a photo of Holdridge here. Okay, so the incident of robbing of so Holdridge says here, the incident of robbing of my mail at West Point during the recent graduation exercises fits into this picture of barbarism. The case, so I am informed, is still under investigation, but what are the honored classmates who know of the crime and still remain mute? What of the committees of Congress, Armed Forces, and Postal, which have been informed of the crime and remain inert? What of the Pentagon, of the Attorney General, of the White House? Uh, of the Attorney General, what of the White House? One would presume that if a robbery of the U.S. mails occurred, that they would show mild interest and even concern. We learned again, if you want to commit a crime, don't steal a loaf of bread. Be elected or appointed to high government office where you are covered with the cloak of, quote, top secrecy, and with immunity commute a big crime. 2, 3, 4, or even 5 stars on your uniform would extend the immunity. As you will remember, these military men who laugh at robbing the U.S. mail were the same ones in principle or as individuals who forced the discharge of practically all members of the West Point football team a few years ago for the relatively minor offense of cribbing on examinations. Quote, cribbing on examinations. Quote, old grads reiterate from generation to generation that, quote, West Point has gone to hell. It is not West Point that has gone to hell. It is the old grads. Continuing here from Holdridge. Small wonder then, as I watched the fine young men of West Point passing in review at the evening parade, marching with the perfection of automatons, the macabre thought flashed through my mind that under each, quote, far bucket hat with its pompon, I saw a grim flesh death's head row upon of. Okay, I'm going to repeat that last line here. So Holdridge says, small wonder then, as I watched the fine young men of West Point passing in review at the evening parade, marching with the perfection of automatons, the macabre thought flashed through my mind that under each far bucket hat with its pompon, I saw a grim, fleshless death's head, row upon row of them. A shudder passed over me. Then Holdridge writes here, Hopi Indians is the next headline. These two play a role in the great drama of barbarism. In the clean, bright desert air of Arizona, you will find a true civilization, a spiritual island in the midst of surrounding environment of corruption and barbarism. Through a strange manifestation of destiny, somebody in Washington has, quote, goofed since our government was founded, with the result that the Hopis now emerge as free and independent as they were when Columbus discovered America. Today, they make a heroic stand, hoping in vain for the righteous action by our government, which has rejected righteousness, prepared to submit the issue of their sovereignty to the United Nations, and relying, as in the past, upon the Great Spirit which has brought them without wavering down the long trail. Barbaric, quote, Christianity might learn a lesson in spirituality from this civilized people. I enclose a letter of July 24th, 1957 to Eisenhower on this issue. And then Holdridge goes here to section 10 is anti-Semitism, section 9 here. Correspondents frequently remonstrate to me that I waste my time fighting the Jesuits and the papacy when I should be turning my attention to the Jews, who, as they say, are the real danger to the United States. The literature which they enclose, well printed in great supply from the great, quote, protocols of the learned elders of Zion, proven forgeries, Holdridge then puts in brackets after that, to the sheets issued by Gerald L.K. Smith, attest to unlimited financial resources. I carry no torch for Jews as Jews. I carry a torch for liberty and justice under our Constitution for all of our people, regardless of race, creed, and color. This test I apply to anti-Semitism. I go on record stating that in all my life and within my considerable experience, I have never discovered any documented or any other reason to show that Jewish citizens of the United States cannot or by not be loyal to our Constitution. I find no force within their ranks at home or abroad comparable to the forces of the papacy and the 40 Thieves attempting to interfere by subversion with our internal and international affairs. I find no justification in reason for the emotional, irrational, and double-distilled venom being injected into the minds and bloodstream of our people to cause them to hate the Jews. Wow, this is the Holdridge is spot on with this here, saying all this all the way back in 1957. I consider this a campaign of hatred to be of such wickedness as the world has never known and the product of diseased minds. As one concerned about national unity of all of our people, I necessarily search for causes. This is no limited campaign of hatred instigated by a Gerald L.K. Smith or a Ku Klux Klan or a Ku Klux Klan on their own initiative. This goes far deeper. If we read our history clearly, we see the plot exposed in Hitler's Germany, where Hitler was placed in power by the 40 Thieves with the fine Italian hand of Pope Pius XII and the Jesuits operating behind the, quote, purple curtain, with terror and death for the Jews set up as scapegoats, the end result. That's exactly spot on, and a Nazi himself, Walter Schellenberg, writes in his memoirs that Hitler strictly modeled the Nazi Party off the Jesuits, and that Heinrich Himmler modeled the Nazi SS off the Jesuits. Um, to relate this divisive campaign of hatred of Jews to the Vatican is therefore logical and consistent with their teachings of, quote, divide and rule, preliminary to the establishment of a world theocracy under the Pope, and then Holdridge writes bracket Jesuits, which can be accomplished only if all other religions or political heresies, whether Protestant, Jewish, Mohammedan, Greek Orthodox, Communist, United Nations, or other, are destroyed. I would agree with all the above except the United Nations there. The Vatican created the United Nations. But continuing here, I warn our people against participation in this campaign of hatred. The same terrorism and death can happen here. It has already happened to many. You may be next, Holdridge says. Then we go to the last page here, page 4. Then Holdridge writes, the next heading is Hooverism. The power key to the current dark ages is epitomized by the word Hooverism. The barbarisms of the Middle Ages were accomplished within the established legal order, quote, the king can do no wrong, end quote. And then, quote, the divine right of kings, and then Holdridge quotes, with benefit of clergy, and then he puts in brackets the Vatican after. That legal basis was destroyed by the reign of terror of the French Revolution. The present Dark Ages, on the contrary, has been imposed upon the people in violation of the law and order established by our Constitution, accomplished through violence and threat of violence, physical and psychological, which have turned the United States into a fear-saturated nation of moral cowards, as happened in Hitler's Germany. I'm going to repeat that last sentence there. The present Dark Ages, on the contrary, has been imposed upon the people in violation of the law and order established by our Constitution, accomplished through violence and threat of violence, physical and psychological, which have turned the United States into a fear-saturated nation of moral cowards, as happened in Hitler's Germany. Then Holdridge continues, at the center of the web of subversion of fear, at the center of the web of subversion through fear, we find one J. Edgar Hoover, head of the FBI. J. Edgar Hoover, it's on my blog here. People haven't seen this photo. Everyone should check it out. J. Edgar Hoover was given the Sword of Ignatius of Loyola, November 24th, 1964. Ignatius Loyola being the founder of the Jesuit order, the crusading Jesuit order. Would you look at that? Here's Hoover receiving a replica of Ignatius's crusading sword here at Loyola, Chicago. But Holdridge writes in 1957 that at the center of the web of subversion through fear, we find one J. Edgar Hoover, head of the FBI, the U.S. Gestapo, drawing its inspiration from the Jesuits. And if you read the book, The FBI and the Catholic Church, and I covered this in this post I did on Hoover. I'll just show you this here. Titled that former FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover given an honorary degree from Jesuit Georgetown and given the sword of Ignatius Loyola. Let me see. There was also an FBI chaplain, a Jesuit, and this comes from the article here from the National Catholic Welfare Conference, 1950. FBI men throughout the country honor priest on his jubilee. The Jesuit priest the Reverend Robert S. Lloyd, S.J., was the main with a quote chaplain for the FBI. And, I know George Wicker Elderkin in his book The Roman Catholic Problem, written in 1954, also exposes this Jesuit here, Robert S. Lloyd. You see, the FBI actually gave this Jesuit a chalice. You see right here. The Mr. Hoover conveyed the well wishes on Father Lloyd's jubilee and presented him with a chalice and patent. The chalice is engraved, quote, 1925 to 1950, Reverend Robert S. Lloyd, S.J., in grateful remembrance of 25 years a priest, your FBI friends. You look at that. You got a chalice from J. Edgar Hoover. And this article shows that the FBI agents all the way back from 1950 were taking annual retreat houses to the Jesuit retreat houses. This Jesuit here, Robert Lloyd, spoke at like 50 consecutive FBI conferences. You see, I have this book is on myarchive.org and Johnny Cerrucci's archive.org page. FBI and the Catholic Church. The Jesuit priest Edmund Walsh, S.J., also would speak at the FBI National Police Academy. Okay, I'm just going to pull the photo back up here of Hoover and then just finish off with what Holdridge spoke of him, and then I'll wrap up this video. Okay, so you see, so Hoover from who? So I'm just going to repeat the whole line again here. So at the center of the web of subversion through fear, we find one J. Edgar Hoover, head of the FBI, the U.S. Gestapo, drawing his inspiration from the Jesuits, who are open enemies of the freedoms written to our charters of liberty, from whom he, Hoover, has accepted many honors, and who quote him as a high priest of their, quote, religion of subversion, promoting their philosophies of psychological violence, infiltrating their secret agents into the FBI, establishing a, quote, blacklist of respected organizations, which the Jesuits, not the Constitution, classify as, quote, subversive, placing on such, quote, purge lists the names of patriotic citizens dedicated to the freedoms established in our charters of liberty, hounding such individuals out of government and civil employment, thus destroying the economic basis for themselves and their families, assassinating their reputations in cynical disregard for, quote, due process required by the Constitution, participating in, quote, murder by administrative act, end quote, against such individuals, instilling fear in members of Congress whose private lives are not immune to his illegal acts, tapping telephones and violating U.S. mails by illegal, quote, searches and seizures to obtain his information, funneling such information to congressional, quote, un-American activities which permit themselves to be used as hatchet men for his conspiracies, accomplishing all of this under the color of defending our people from, quote, communism in order to betray them to, quote, Jesuitism. Oh, that's well said there. Continuing here, there could be by no, quote, McCarthyism without, quote, Hooverism. McCarthy is dead, but J. Edgar Hoover is very still much alive to continue his subversion of constitutional guarantees of personal freedom, doing violence to every basic concept of true, quote, Americanism, for which our soldiers have given their lives, in promoting on the soil of a, quote, free America the sadistic philosophies behind the Spanish Inquisition. And Joseph McCarthy was educated by Jesuits at Marquette University, and I believe on my archive.org page I've archived a good, this was written by a Jesuit, but there's still revealing information in here. If you type in McCarthy on the search bar, yeah, this I put this up a while ago, but this was called The Jesuits and Joe McCarthy by Donald F. Crosby, S.J. I recommend you guys check out this article here. Because you see, like, the order came from the Black Pope, that all the Catholic media had to stay loyal to supporting McCarthy, when because there was like a division between some of the liberal Catholic press. You see, yeah, so right here, the order came from Father John Baptist Jansen's. Yeah, so I recommend you guys check this out here. It's just called The Jesuits and Joe McCarthy. Yeah, so Holdridge continues, McCarthy is dead, but J. Edgar Hoover is still very much alive to continue his subversion of constitutional guarantees of personal freedom, doing violence to every basic concept of true Americanism for which our soldiers have given their lives, and promoting on the soil of a free America the sadistic philosophies behind the Spanish Inquisition. Mark him well. He is a public enemy who is a prime mover in the strategy of the 40 Thieves and the Jesuits to plunge the country into a darker age of ignorance, fear, totalitarianism, and repression. Let but J. Edgar remember that in the time of violence and counter-violence, which but for an act of God will surely occur, purge lists and counter-purge lists will be prepared on the pattern of the reign of terror, on all of which his name will surely appear high in priority. He is a man to be pitied, for if history repeats itself, he hasn't a chance. And actually, the New York Times, actually, I think I put this on my archive.org page too, but I mentioned this in the article. I also mentioned this in the preface for the Dar in the Vatican. that I wrote. But Hoover, a new letter came out here. The New York Times covered this in 2007, that J. Edgar Hoover had plans to completely suspend habeas corpus in 1950 and throw Americans into military detention camps with no due process of law. It says here, so the Bureau had arranged for detention in military facilities of the individuals apprehended. Hoover's plan called for the, quote, permanent detention of roughly 12,000 suspects at military bases, as well as federal prisons. And Hoover says here that the hearings will not be bound by the rules of evidence. Think about that. But Holdridge wraps, he finished up there with Hoover, and then he goes to section 12 here, cleaning up the mess. Many ask for my constructive solution to save us from the ominous dangers which I predict. Solutions can easily be found if our people ardently desire to return to the fundamental principles of law instead of by outlaw. During the past 30 years, I have developed a detailed program within the principles of our Constitution, which I hope to be able to present at a favorable opportunity. It is useless to do so as long as the people still like what they have in the way of bankruptcies, corruption, and H-bombs. A brief summary is available in my pamphlet, Blueprint for Economic Democracy. In the last section, appreciation. I'd like to thank my correspondents for their generous response to my request for financial assistance to enable me to carry on this work. Without their assistance, I would be immobilized. I contribute my personal efforts as a matter of duty under my oath to defend the Constitution. Each one can help in the distribution by requesting copies with contributions made. Continual financial assistance is necessary. And then Holdridge writes, yours for a golden age of emancipation, Herbert C. Holdridge, Brigadier General, U.S. Army. So I recommend you, I'm going to put that onto archive.org soon, but, this general is, worth studying. For sure, one of the most interesting, historical figures I've come across, the 20th century. Holdridge. I was saying, I recommend you check out I found more. I have to upload about 2 more here, but so far I found Herbert Holdridge testifying to Congress on 2 separate occasions here in 1957. This actually has another a special news notes that he wrote specifically on the Federal Reserve in here. Here's Holdridge testifying on the Congress before the Committee on Ways and Means. This one is very good here. He talks about the Pope's plan to monopolize America in this one. And then in this one here, Holdridge is testifying to the Congress about the Vatican's plan to turn America into a fascist police state via the universal military basic training, which is really interesting considering former President Teddy Roosevelt, when he was speaking to the Knights of Columbus in 1907, was all about, we need universal military training. But I recommend you check out, I'm going to upload more of the Holdridge stuff I've got on my computer here to the archive. I recommend you check it out. I just wanted to read that newsletter with you there. I just got it in the mail, and it's I thought it was worth reading. Some good information in there. Hey, how's it going, everyone? Edward Bernays started his career at United Fruit, absolutely. And Bernays also worked at the Liberty League, which was a think tank headed up by Knight of Malta, John J. Raskob, the president of the Knights of Malta, John J. Raskob. Raskob personally hired Bernays to work for the Liberty League, and that's actually I uploaded a biography of Raskob to my archive.org page. I have the physical of this book. It's called Everybody Ought to Be Rich, Life and Times of John J. Raskob, written by David Farber in 2013. Spiritually Smart, I've seen that spirituallysmart.com too hasn't uploaded anything in quite some time. Yeah, so it's recommend people get or download some of the articles off that page. I'll probably archive his Jim Jones page, considering that I don't think he's still uploading, just in case it does go down. Sherman Skolnick's like Skolnick's TV, for instance, is like all down now, which is unfortunate, but Skolnick had archives of all of his Broadsides TV show, and a lot of Skolnick's research exposed the Vatican, especially in Chicago. Chicago literally is might as well be an ancient Rome, but that's where Skolnick was based. But a lot of Skolnick's Broadside shows used to be on a site called Skolnick's.tv, but now it's gone. So it's important to archive stuff. But yeah, I think that's all for this one, YouTube. Well, with Iran, with Soleimani, that's the name of the Iranian general. The Vatican is actually very close to Iran. I saw in this article that Iran actually has more diplomats stationed to the Vatican than almost any other country in the world. Here's an article here why Iran is really cozying up to the Vatican. They're playing this current conflict completely on both sides. They play all conflicts on both sides. You hear the president of Iran in 2016, Hassan Rouhani, went to the Vatican here. First time the Pope, he sat with the Iranian head of government back in 1999 too. See, the Holy See and Iran have had diplomatic relations all the way back since 1957 or 1954. Look at that. Look at this. Iran is an Islamic theocracy that nurtures nuclear ambitions and sponsors terrorism. The Holy See does neither. Really, the Holy See does. Wow, this is some great comedy here. Really, the Holy See doesn't sponsor. Okay, I'll just show you a historical work that just shatters this pathetic Catholic apologetic line. You should read here, Genocide in Satellite Croatia. Read this whole book and then tell me with a straight face if the Vatican doesn't nurture state-sponsored terrorism. What a joke. But you can see, Iran is a very despotic country, and that's why Iran and the Vatican are very close. Where was this here? I thought it was in this article too, where it mentioned that Iran has more diplomats. Yeah, right here. But did you know that Iran has more diplomats accredited to the Holy See than any other nation except the Dominican Republic? What? Just think of that. The Dominican Republic, who signed a concordat with the Vatican in 1954 when a bloody dictator, Rafael Trujillo, was in charge of the Dominican Republic. I did an article on this here, reprinting the 1954 Concordat. You can read, there's a book on my archive.org too called The Last Caesar. It's a biography written on Rafael Trujillo by one of his top generals. He was a Catholic general, but there's information about how close the church was to Trujillo, and the church actually ended up playing Trujillo. After he gave all the concessions to the church, he became a liability because how much of a despot he was, and the church, for PR reasons, had to assassinate Trujillo through their CIA. It's an interesting story, but according to Iran has more, just as the second amount of legal diplomats stationed to the Vatican outside of the Dominican Republic. It's Iran. And I recommend you read the Concordat between the Dominican Republic and the Vatican to see how owned the Dominican Republic is by the Vatican. The Vatican even signed a special military Concordat with the Dominican in 1990. Or 1958 supplementary military Concordat with the supplement in 1990. But I think that's all for this one, YouTube. Peace and love, and that'll be a good to see how the Vatican goes. Yeah, that or the Al Smith dinner. Yeah, that will be interesting. That will be interesting. The thing with Trump, though, just I think most of the war hawks in his administration are also controlled, by the Jesuits. Like David Norquist was the Undersecretary of State or Undersecretary of War, one of those positions. David Norquist went to Jesuit Georgetown as the brother of Grover Norquist. The head of the United States Marine Corps, Joseph Dunford, went to Jesuit Georgetown. Donald Trump has had 3 consecutive national or executive secretaries of the National Security Council who went to Jesuit schools. The current one, Virginia O'Hare, went to Loyola, Maryland. But yeah, definitely though, like that's you're correct though. There's some dude. That's an angle that people aren't looking at this. Everyone's looking at people aren't looking at the Vatican alliance with Iran. And also, I'd say because Iran is also geopolitically very aligned with Russia. Putin has had 3 meetings with Pope Francis. 3, just with Pope Francis. So yeah, a lot of people aren't looking at like how the Pope is, playing both sides. And I think the Vatican's getting ready for a reality where they're going to move most of their energy behind China. And if that, this, I'm not saying it's definitively going to happen, but if that does happen, America wouldn't, lose its status as like the most powerful nation state in the world, and China will now move to become the global player on things. But you can see if that ends up happening. But yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in. And actually, some dude, I noticed that I noticed where you're at. The Queen of the Netherlands is a Roman Catholic. Yeah, Queen Maxima. And I realized that's pretty profound. They were symbolic that the Netherlands has been recaptured by the Vatican, because the Netherlands historically has been a Protestant citadel against popery. You can see the current Queen of the Netherlands was Roman Catholic. I'm sure you're aware of that, some dude. I just wanted to share that with some of the other viewers, and just I'm looking into more of the current Dutch geopolitical situation, and I'm finding that the Jesuits are just as in control there as they are here in Canada. Canada, well, you could say Canada is another one, an historically Protestant country, but in reality, the Roman Catholic Church has been in control of Canada since 1867. But yeah, that's all for this one, YouTube. Peace and love, and I'll catch you on the next one. Take care.